The Duke's Runaway Bride. Chapter 1. The Flight. The hem of Lady Marianne Cross's silk gown was soaked through with mud and morning dew, a ruinous state for a garment that had cost her father a small fortune. She did not care. She could not care. The only thought that propelled her legs forward, stumbling over the gnarled roots of the ancient oak forest, was away. Away from Wentford Manor. Away from the gilded cage that had been her childhood home. Away from the looming, suffocating prospect of a marriage to a man whose name she had only heard whispered in tones of cold fear. The Duke of Ashworth, Alexander Reed. Her father, the Earl of Stamford, had announced the betrothal 3 days prior, not as a conversation, but as a decree. "You will marry him, Marianne. The settlements are signed. The Duke requires a wife of unimpeachable breeding, and I require his influence in Parliament. It is a transaction of mutual benefit." He had not looked at her when he spoke, only at the ledger open on his desk. To the Earl, she was not a daughter. She was a line item, a debt to be settled. And what did anyone truly know of the Duke? Rumours, like poisoned ivy, had grown thick over his name. It was said he had broken his first betrothed's heart so utterly she had entered a nunnery in disgrace. It was said he kept a mistress in every port town from Dover to Edinburgh. It was said, most damning of all, that his previous steward had disappeared under mysterious circumstances after questioning the Duke's accounts. The servants at Wentford Manor crossed themselves when his name was mentioned. "A man of cold intellect," they whispered. "A man with no heart, only ambition." Marianne had pictured him, a hulking, sneering creature with dead eyes and a cruel mouth, a man who would lock her in a country estate and visit her only to demand an heir. The very thought made her stomach clench into a knot of pure ice, so she had run. It had been absurdly easy. The household was in chaos, preparing for the Duke's impending arrival to finalise the arrangements. No one noticed the Earl's youngest daughter slip out the servants' door at dawn, a small satchel of bread, cheese and her mother's pearl brooch clutched to her chest. She had no destination, only the desperate hope that a cousin in Scotland might take her in before the scandal broke. But the forest had proved deeper than her childhood memories. By midday, the trees had closed in, their branches knitting together to block the sun. The path she had followed, little more than a deer track, had vanished entirely. Her boots, stylish but utterly useless, had begun to blister her heels, and the bread was gone, devoured hours ago in a fit of nervous hunger. Panic, cold and sharp, began to seep into her bones. She was lost, truly, irrevocably lost. The grand houses of the neighbouring gentry were miles away, and she had no idea which direction led to the main road. She was a well-bred lady, taught to embroider and play the pianoforte, not to navigate a wilderness. She crested a small rise, gasping for breath, and then she saw it. A house. Not a cottage or a farmhouse, but a substantial manor of grey stone, its windows dark and uninviting. Ivy crawled up its walls like grasping fingers, and the garden before it was a wilderness of untrimmed hedges and overgrown roses. It looked abandoned, or nearly so. Yet a thin ribbon of smoke rose from one of the chimneys, a fragile promise of warmth and human company. Desperation overrode caution. Marianne half stumbled, half slid down the slope, her gown now beyond salvaging. She crossed the unkempt lawn, her heart hammering against her ribs. She raised her hand to knock on the heavy oak door, but before her knuckles could make contact, the door swung inward. A man stood in the doorway. He was not what she expected. There was no sneer, no cruelty in his face. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in simple riding clothes of dark brown and cream. His hair was the colour of wet sand, slightly dishevelled, as if he had been running his hands through it. His eyes were the most startling thing about him. A deep, clear grey, like the sky before a storm. They were not dead. They were, at this moment, merely tired and deeply unimpressed. "Unless you are selling something," the man said, his voice low and dry. "I should warn you that I am not buying. Not even pity." Marianne opened her mouth, but no words came. Her lips were cracked, her hair had escaped its pins and hung in tangled ropes about her face, and her gown was a testament to every mile she had walked. She must have looked like a madwoman, or a beggar. I am lost," she managed. "I need shelter, just for the night. I can pay." She fumbled in her satchel for the pearl brooch, holding it out with trembling fingers. The man's gaze dropped to the brooch, then rose to her face. Something flickered in those grey eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or suspicion. "That is a valuable piece for a lost traveller," he said quietly. "You are not a common wanderer." Marianne's blood ran cold. She had been a fool. This man could be anyone, a highwayman, a rogue, a murderer. She took a step back, but her heel caught on a loose stone, and she would have fallen if he had not reached out with startling speed to catch her arm. His grip was firm but not painful. Steadying. "Easy," he said. "I'm not going to harm you. Come inside before you collapse. You look like you haven't eaten in a day." It was the truth. The smell of something cooking, stew perhaps, with fresh bread, drifted from within the house. Marianne's stomach betrayed her with a loud, embarrassing growl. The man's mouth twitched, the faintest hint of something that might have been amusement. "That settles it. I cannot have a lady faint on my doorstep. The scandal would be insufferable." He released her arm and stepped aside, holding the door open wider. After a moment's hesitation, every instinct of self-preservation warring with sheer exhaustion, Marianne stepped over the threshold. The interior of the manor was as neglected as the exterior. Dust sheets covered much of the furniture in the entrance hall. The chandelier overhead was thick with cobwebs. But a fire crackled in the grate of a room to the left. A study, she saw, lined with books and papers, and the air there was warm and smelled of coffee and old paper. "Sit," the man said, gesturing to a leather armchair near the fire. He disappeared through a side door and returned moments later with a bowl of stew, a thick slice of bread, and a cup of water. He set them on a small table beside the chair. "Eat. Then we will discuss how you came to be wandering my woods in a ball gown." "My woods." Marianne's hand froze halfway to the bread. She looked up at him, really looked this time, taking in the authoritative set of his shoulders, the quiet command in his voice, the way he stood as if he owned not just this room, but every acre of land surrounding it. "Who are you?" she whispered. The man inclined his head, a gesture of ironic courtesy. "Alexander Reed, Duke of Ashworth. And you, I believe, are my runaway bride." The bread fell from her fingers. Chapter 2. The Reckoning. For a long, suspended moment, the only sound in the room was the crackle of the fire and the frantic thudding of Marianne's own heart. She stared at the man before her, this quiet, rumpled, unexpectedly gentle stranger, and tried to reconcile him with the monster of rumour. It was impossible. "You cannot be," she heard herself say, her voice thin and reedy. "The Duke of Ashworth he is not." "Not what?" Alexander Reed asked. He did not move to sit, merely stood with his arms crossed over his chest, watching her with that calm, assessing gaze. "Not living in a half-ruined manor in the middle of nowhere? Not eating his own stew and answering his own door? I am afraid I am precisely that. Disappointing, I know. The Ton does love its monsters, and I have failed spectacularly to live up to my reputation." Marianne's mind was a storm of confusion. She had expected cruelty, not dry humour. She had expected a fortress, not a forgotten house. But the stories, the betrothed who entered a nunnery, the missing steward. Ah. Something darkened in Alexander's eyes, a shadow of genuine pain. Lady Beatrice. Yes. She entered a nunnery because she was in love with her cousin, not with me. I released her from our engagement when I discovered the truth. The Ton, of course, assumed I had broken her heart. It made for a better story than the truth, which is that I am remarkably easy to jilt. He paused. And the steward, Mr. Higgins. He did not disappear. He embezzled nearly £10,000 from my estates and fled to the continent. I chose not to pursue him. The scandal of a trial would have ruined his wife and children who were innocent. I let him go, and the Ton decided I had murdered him. Marianne's breath caught. She had heard those rumours, repeated them in her own mind as evidence of his villainy, and all along the truth had been something else entirely, something almost honourable. "Why do you not correct them?" she asked. "Why do you let people believe such things?" Alexander moved at last, walking to the window and staring out at the overgrown garden. The fading afternoon light carved harsh angles into his face. "Because," he said quietly, "it is easier to be feared than to be pitied. A duke who is kind is a duke who is weak. A duke who is feared is a duke who is left alone. I have learned to prefer solitude to false sympathy." The words landed in Marianne's chest like stones. She understood them better than she wanted to admit. She had spent her entire life being managed, married off, treated as a possession. Solitude, at least, was honest. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "I believed the worst of you. I ran from you without ever giving you a chance." Alexander turned back to face her. "To be fair," he said, "I also believed the worst of you." Marianne blinked. "What?" "I assumed you were like every other debutante my father pursued for me, greedy, scheming, more interested in my title and my fortune than in me as a man. I agreed to the marriage because I was tired of fighting, not because I wanted a wife. I had no intention of being a good husband, Marianne. I intended to give you a house in London, an allowance, and my name, and then leave you to your own devices. I would have been absent, cold, and utterly useless to you. You would have been miserable." He said it without self-pity, as a simple statement of fact. And Marianne, despite everything, felt a strange rush of gratitude for his honesty. "Then we are both fools," she said softly. "You judged me without knowing me, and I did the same to you." A long silence stretched between them. Outside, the light was fading, turning the sky a bruised purple. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the room was growing cold. Alexander crossed to the hearth and crouched to add another log. The motion was unself-conscious, practical. This was not a man accustomed to having servants anticipate his needs. "You cannot stay here," he said without looking at her. "Not overnight. The scandal would destroy both of us. A duke and his runaway bride, alone in a deserted house. The gossip sheets would have us married by morning and divorced by noon." Marianne's heart, which had just begun to settle, lurched again. "Then what do you suggest? I cannot go back to my father. He will lock me in my room until the wedding, and then deliver me to the church in chains if necessary." Alexander finished arranging the log and stood, brushing dust from his trousers. "I suggest," he said slowly, "that we stop being strangers." "I do not understand." He turned to face her fully, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable in his expression. A crack in the armour of the feared duke. "You ran because you believed I was a monster. I agreed to marry you because I believed you were a fortune hunter. We were both wrong, so perhaps we should begin again. Not as betrothed, not as enemies, but as two people who have been forced into an impossible situation and must decide, together, how to escape it." He extended his hand. Marianne looked at it, strong, capable, calloused in a way she had not expected from a duke. She thought of her father's cold ledgers. She thought of the rumours she had believed without question. She thought of the quiet honesty in Alexander Reed's voice when he had admitted his own failures. She placed her hand in his. My name is Marianne Cross, she said. I am 22 years old. I prefer reading to dancing, and I have secretly taught myself to ride astride because side saddles are an abomination. I am terrified of thunderstorms and incapable of lying without blushing. And I have no desire to marry anyone, least of all a man who does not want me. Alexander's fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. My name is Alexander Reed. I am 34 years old. I prefer solitude to society, and I have spent the last 5 years rebuilding an estate that my father bankrupted through gambling and neglect. I am terrified of nothing except the thought of becoming him, and I have no desire to marry anyone, least of all a woman who does not want me. A strange, unexpected smile tugged at Marianne's lips. Then we are in agreement. It appears so. He released her hand, but his gaze held hers. Which leaves us with a rather significant problem. Your father and the settlements, my reputation and my duty. We cannot simply refuse to marry. The consequences would be catastrophic for both our families. Marianne's brief hope guttered. So we are trapped. Alexander shook his head slowly. Not trapped. Delayed. There is a third option, Marianne, one that neither of us has considered. What option? He moved to his desk, a massive, scarred thing covered in papers and ledgers. He pulled out a chair and sat, gesturing for her to do the same. When she was seated across from him, he leaned forward, his grey eyes intent. We marry, he said. Marianne's protest died on her lips as he held up a hand. Hear me out. We marry as planned. The settlements stand. Your father gets his influence. The ton gets its spectacle. But the marriage itself will be nothing more than a contract, a partnership. You will have your own rooms, your own allowance, your own freedom to come and go as you please. I will ask nothing of you that you are not willing to give. In return, you will help me restore this estate and navigate the social waters that I have so thoroughly poisoned with my reputation. We will be allies, not lovers. Friends, perhaps, in time. Marianne stared at him. It was absurd. It was reckless. It was the most sensible proposal she had ever heard. You would do that? She asked slowly. Give me freedom within the cage of marriage. Alexander's mouth curved into a wry smile. It would not be a cage, Marianne. Not if we build it together. I have spent my entire life trapped by other people's expectations. I will not do the same to you. If we do this, we do it on our terms. No one else's. She thought of her father, who saw her as currency. She thought of the ton, who would devour her reputation if she returned home unmarried. She thought of the future her mother had endured. Silent, obedient, slowly fading into the wallpaper. And then she thought of this man, who had offered her honesty when he could have offered cruelty, who had fed her when she was hungry, who had caught her when she stumbled. I have conditions, she said. Alexander nodded. Name them. First, I will not be hidden away in the country while you live your life in London. If we are to be partners, we face the world together. Agreed. Second, I want a say in the running of Wentford Manor. I am not an ornament. I have a mind, and I intend to use it. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. I would not have it any other way. This estate is in shambles. I could use a partner, not a servant. And third, Marianne hesitated, then pressed on. If either of us wishes to end this arrangement, truly end it, with no blame and no scandal, we find a way. I will not be trapped forever. Alexander was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to a small cabinet in the corner of the room. He withdrew a decanter of brandy and 2 glasses, pouring a measure into each. He handed one to her. I agree, he said simply, to all of it, on one condition of my own. Which is? That you stop looking at me as if I might turn into a monster at any moment. I am not my reputation, Marianne. I am just a tired man who has been alone for too long and does not wish to be alone anymore. She raised her glass. He raised his. To partnerships, she said. To freedom, he replied. They drank. Chapter 3. The Negotiation. The following morning dawned cold and clear, a pale winter sun cutting through the neglected windows of Wentford Manor. Marianne woke in a small bedroom that Alexander had hastily prepared for her, a truckle bed, a pitcher of cold water, and a threadbare blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. It was the least luxurious room she had ever slept in. It was also the first room in which she had felt entirely safe. She dressed in the only clean garment she could find, an old maid's frock that Alexander had produced from somewhere, too large in the shoulders and too short in the hem. It was a far cry from the ruined silk gown she had arrived in, but she found she did not mind. The gown had belonged to her father's expectations. This frock belonged to no one. She found Alexander in the kitchen, of all places, standing over a smoking stove with a look of intense concentration. He was attempting to fry eggs. The eggs were losing. "Good morning," Marianne said, leaning against the doorframe. "I see domesticity is not your strong suit." Alexander glanced up, and for a moment his expression was so open, so unguarded, that she felt a sharp pang in her chest. He looked young, she realized, younger than his 34 years. The weight of his reputation seemed to lift when he was alone. "I can rebuild a collapsed retaining wall," he said dryly. "I can balance a ledger to the last farthing. But eggs, it seems, are beyond me." He scraped the burnt remains onto a plate and offered it to her with a rueful shrug. "Toast?" They ate together at a rough wooden table, the burnt eggs and slightly stale bread, and Marianne found herself laughing, actually laughing, when Alexander accidentally set a dishcloth on fire and had to douse it in the sink. It was not the laughter of a society lady, delicate and measured. It was real, unforced, and it startled them both. "You have a nice laugh," Alexander said quietly once the flames were out. Marianne felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You are not what I expected, Your Grace." "Alexander," he corrected. "If we are to be partners, we will dispense with titles. And you are not what I expected either, Marianne. I expected a porcelain doll. I got a woman who laughs at burning dishcloths and eats burnt eggs without complaint." "The eggs were terrible," she said. "The eggs were an abomination. I will hire a cook. Today." They spent the morning walking the grounds. Alexander showed her the overgrown gardens, the crumbling stables, the tenant cottages that had fallen into disrepair. He spoke with a quiet passion about his plans, a new drainage system for the south fields, a rotation of crops that would restore the depleted soil, a school for the tenants' children. He knew every acre, every boundary stone, every struggling farmer by name. "This is why you have no reputation in London," Marianne said as they stood on a hill overlooking the estate. "You have been here the whole time. Working." Alexander nodded. "My father left this place in ruins. Gambling debts, neglected leases, tenants driven to destitution. It has taken me 5 years to stop the bleeding. It will take another 5 to make this place thrive. I had no time for London seasons and parliamentary dinners. The Ton filled the silence with rumours. I let them." "But why?" Marianne pressed. "Why not send a steward? Why do it yourself?" He turned to look at her, and she saw again that vulnerability beneath the calm surface. "Because these people, the tenants, the labourers, the families who have lived on this land for generations, they are not a line item in a ledger. They are human beings. My father forgot that. I will not." Something shifted in Marianne's chest. This was not the cold, ambitious Duke of Rumour. This was a man who carried the weight of his father's failures on his shoulders and called it duty. Then let me help you, she said. He looked at her, surprised. You mean that? I do. I have been trained my entire life to be useless, to embroider and pour tea and smile at boring men. But I am not useless, Alexander. I can keep accounts, I can write letters, I can talk to tenants and listen to their problems. Give me something to do. Let me earn my place at Wentford Manor. For a long moment he simply stared at her. Then slowly he smiled. A real smile, not the wry, defensive curve of his lips she had seen before. It transformed his face. You are remarkable, he said. Do you know that? Marianne looked away, embarrassed and pleased in equal measure. I am merely practical. No, he said softly, you are remarkable, and I am beginning to think that running away from me was the best decision you ever made. That afternoon, they began to plan. Not the wedding, that would come soon enough, a necessary performance for the ton. But the life after. Alexander spread his maps and ledgers across the kitchen table, and Marianne sat beside him, asking questions, offering suggestions, challenging his assumptions. He listened to her. Actually listened, in a way no man ever had. The dairy is underproducing, she noted, pointing to a column of figures. Have you considered switching from cows to goats? Goats are hardier and the milk is richer. My mother's estate used them to great success. Alexander frowned at the ledger. I had not considered it, but you are right. The soil here is too thin for good pasture. Goats would fare better. He made a note in the margin. Anything else? She spent the next hour going through the estate accounts, finding small inefficiencies and larger missed opportunities. Alexander did not grow defensive or dismissive. He grew animated, engaged, his grey eyes bright with intellectual excitement. Where did you learn this? He asked finally, leaning back in his chair. Women of your station are not typically taught estate management. Marianne hesitated. This was the part of her story she rarely told. My mother taught me, before she died. She was the one who ran my father's estates, not him. He took the credit, but she did the work. She used to sit with me in the nursery and explain ledgers and leases and crop rotations. She said that knowledge was the only armour a woman could wear against a world that wanted her helpless. Your mother sounds like an extraordinary woman. She was. Marianne's voice caught. She died when I was 14. After that, my father locked away her ledgers and hired a steward who stole him blind. He never forgave her, I think, for being smarter than him. Alexander reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The touch was light, questioning, easily withdrawn. Marianne did not withdraw. Then we will honour her memory, he said quietly. We will build something here that she would have been proud of. Together. It was the word together that undid her, not the touch, not the kindness, but the simple, profound promise of partnership. Marianne had been alone in a crowded house her entire life. Here, in this neglected manor with this misunderstood man, she was no longer alone. Yes, she whispered. Together. Chapter 4. The Choice. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small chapel on the edge of Alexander's estate. It was not the grand affair her father had envisioned. There were no hundreds of guests, no flowers flown in from France, no bishop officiating. Just a local vicar, a handful of tenants who had come to wish their duke well, and Marianne's father, who sat in the front pew with an expression of sour triumph. The Earl of Stamford believed he had won. His daughter was marrying the Duke of Ashworth, just as he had commanded. The settlements were signed. The influence was secured. He did not see the quiet conspiracy between the bride and groom. The way Alexander's hand trembled slightly as he took Marianne's, the way her eyes met his with a calm that was not resignation, but resolve. They spoke their vows, simple words, traditional words, but between the lines They had written their own promises. I will not cage you. I will not be caged. We will build something new. The vicar pronounced them man and wife. Alexander leaned in to kiss her, a brief, chaste brush of lips, proper for public consumption. But as he pulled back, his thumb traced a small circle on the back of her hand, a private reassurance. Marianne's father left immediately after the ceremony, satisfied that his transaction was complete. He did not stay for the modest breakfast that the tenants had prepared. He did not ask his daughter if she was happy. He did not look back. Good riddance, Marianne thought, and meant it. That night, Wentford Manor was quiet. The tenants had gone home. The vicar had returned to his parish. Only Marianne and Alexander remained, sitting in the study before the fire, the remains of a simple supper between them. "Well," Alexander said, stretching his long legs toward the hearth, "we are married." "So we are," Marianne agreed. "How do you feel?" She considered the question. It deserved an honest answer. "Free," she said finally. "I know that makes no sense. I am more bound to you than I have ever been to anyone. But I feel free." Alexander nodded slowly. "I know what you mean. I have spent my whole life pretending to be someone I am not. The cold duke, the feared monster. Tonight, sitting here with you, I do not have to pretend. That is a kind of freedom I did not know existed." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the flames dance. The firelight played across Alexander's face, softening the hard lines, revealing the man beneath the title. Marianne found herself studying him. The strong jaw, the capable hands, the grey eyes that held more warmth than she had ever expected to find. "Alexander," she said quietly. The terms of our agreement. You said you would ask nothing of me that I was not willing to give." He turned to look at her, his expression cautious. "I meant it." "I know you did. That is why—" She took a breath. "That is why I am choosing to give you something, not because I must, because I want to." She shifted in her chair, turning to face him fully. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was certain he could hear it. "I came here expecting a monster. I found a man, a good man, a kind man, a man who burns eggs and lets embezzlers go free because he does not want to hurt their families. A man who rebuilds an estate with his own hands because he refuses to abandon his tenants. A man who offered me freedom when he could have offered me a cage." Alexander's throat moved as he swallowed. "Marianne, let me finish." She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I am not marrying you because my father commanded it. I am not marrying you because society expects it. I am marrying you because I choose you, Alexander Reed, not the Duke of Ashworth. You, and I am asking you to choose me, not the Earl's daughter, not the convenient bride. Me." The silence stretched, taut and fragile. Then Alexander raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. His eyes, when they met hers, were bright with something that looked very much like hope. "I chose you the moment you knocked on my door," he said hoarsely. "I just did not know it yet. I thought I was offering you a partnership, a contract, a way to survive. But you have made me want more than survival, Marianne. You have made me want a life." He stood, drawing her to her feet. They stood face to face, inches apart, the fire warming their backs. "I choose you," he said. "Not because I must, because I cannot imagine choosing anyone else." Marianne rose on her toes and kissed him, not the chaste kiss of the chapel, but a real kiss. Tentative at first, then deepening as his arms came around her, pulling her close. He tasted of coffee and something sweeter, something that felt like beginning. When they finally parted, both breathless, Marianne laughed, that same unguarded, real laugh from the kitchen. "We are going to scandalize the ton," she said. Alexander grinned, and in his grey eyes she saw the future. Not a cage, not a transaction, but a partnership, forged in honesty and sealed by choice. "Let them talk," he said. "We have better things to do." He kissed her again, and the fire burned low, and Wentford Manor, that neglected, forgotten place, became, at last, a home. Epilogue. 1 year later. The Duke and Duchess of Ashworth threw a Christmas ball that was the talk of the season. Not because it was lavish, it was not, by London standards, particularly grand, but because the Duke smiled, because the Duchess laughed, because they danced every dance together, and when they looked at each other, the entire room seemed to fade away. The rumours changed, slowly. The monster became a man. The runaway became a partner. And in the end, when people asked Lady Marianne how she had tamed the fearsome Duke of Ashworth, she simply smiled. "I did not tame him," she said. "I merely took the time to know him, and he took the time to know me. Everything else was just a matter of choosing each other, every single day." Behind her, Alexander appeared in the doorway, his grey eyes soft. He held out his hand. "Coming, Duchess?" Marianne took it. "Always." The end. Thank you, dear reader of the Regency Gazette, for joining us in another tale of love, intrigue, and whispered ballroom secrets. If today's romance delighted you, kindly bestow a like upon this video. It helps our Gazette reach more lovers of Regency storytelling. For weekly journeys into dukes, debutantes, scandals, and slow-burning devotion, please subscribe to the Gazette and tap the little bell so you are notified the moment the next story is published. Until our next edition, may your days be filled with grace and your nights with the promise of romance.